Alright, what's going on, guys? If there's one thing that's been keeping the wait for Elden Ring DLC alive and stoking the flames of our interest, it's the fact that the base game alone is so rich and full of things to discover, even now over a year and a half since the original release. And so today we are back uncovering more mysteries in the game with 10 more discoveries that I guarantee you missed. And trust me guys, some of the ones on today's list are mind-blowing. But first, let me give a shout out to today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle action game ever made, where you can pilot over 2,000 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships in dynamic combined arms PvP battles. It's actually incredible the amount of detail that goes into every vehicle, making the game as immersive as possible, and you can play it right now on PC, Xbox, or PlayStation. And one of the things that impressed me a lot about this game is that every vehicle does not have standard HP, but instead a fully handcrafted component damage model, making the action as realistic as possible. Combined with fully 4K graphics, you're in for an awesome experience. So if you want to jump into War Thunder for free today, hop down to the description and use my link to get a large bonus pack for new players and players returning after 6 months, including premium vehicles, boosters, decorations, and more. But now let's get back into the video. Let's start off today with some handy gameplay tips. No FromSoftware game is complete without a poison swamp or hazardous area that can kill you just by being in it. But by far one of the worst afflictions you can receive in the game is scarlet rot. But thankfully for how prevalent it is, the game does give you ample tools to deal with it, one of which is a pyromancy called Flame Cleanse Me. Now if you read the description of this spell, you'll see that it says alleviates buildup and cures poison and scarlet rot. But did you know that this incantation actually has a secret benefit? If you ever find yourself going up against an enemy that uses frost damage, you'll want to have Flame Cleanse Me in your back pocket. And that's because on top of curing poison and scarlet rot, Flame Cleanse Me can also cure frostbite. Now one thing you'll notice is that if you try to use this spell while the status is building up, surprisingly nothing will happen. However, if you let the frostbite fully proc and gain the debuff caused by the affliction, then you can use Flame Cleanse Me and it will fully cure you of that frost. And there's a pretty cool reason for why this happens. Every time you cast Flame Cleanse Me, another thing you might not have noticed about it is that it does a small amount of damage to the player every time they use it. Now it's a negligible amount, and if you blink you'll miss it, but it does indicate that the player is literally burning themselves, and so I'm sure the developers thought after making this, well, why wouldn't that work for cold? So now we know it does. But now let's talk about a way to deal with one of the most annoying enemies in the entire game. Did you know that you can actually parry Stormhawks? Because after almost 500 hours, I didn't. But it's a little bit complicated. The Stormhawks have a wide range of attacks, including strikes with their beak. And even though you can use the parry as a sort of block, the only attacks you can actually parry fully are their strikes with their blades on their talons. So unfortunately that does mean you can't parry the variants that don't have these talon blades. At least that's what it seemed like from my testing, and I tried for about 10 minutes. But since the Stormhawk's talon blades are actually a weapon the player can wield, perhaps that's why they're able to be parried. So if you want to take the time and practice to become a parry god, these Warhawks are about to become a lot easier. But now let's switch gears for a second and pop over to Rhea Lucaria. As you journey throughout this level, you'll come across a lot of Glintstone sorcerers wearing various Glintstone crowns. And the most common variations you'll see are the Karalos Glintstone crown, the Lazuli Glintstone crown, and the Twin Sage Glintstone crown, which can be acquired from Glintstone crabs throughout the level. In Elden Ring, there are a total of 9 different Glintstone crowns, associated with the various kinds of sorcerers and notable NPCs. But did you know there is a secret 10th Glintstone crown that the player actually can't get? If you make your way off the beaten path, across the section of rooftops that leads to a second Glintstone key, among other special items, you'll eventually get to a long bridge with several marionette soldiers, and at the end of this bridge is a Twin Sage sorcerer. Now if you're like me and you were occupied by the marionette birds, you probably started killing everything in your path and didn't think twice about these enemies. But if you would have taken the time to pay attention with a close eye, this sorcerer is special. He is wearing an entirely unique Glintstone crown that is unobtainable by the player. This version is a variation of the Twin Sage crown, combining the Lazuli Glintstone crown and the Olivinus Glintstone crown. For reference, here's the normal Twin Sage crown. Very different than what we can see here. Well, we can also find this variation of Twin Sage as a shade, but as it stands, there's no way to get their crown. But let me ask you this, if there was, what do you think the special ability of this one would be? While we're on the topic of items, let's take a look at some very interesting designs. Firstly, the Scepter of the All-Knowing, the token weapon of Gideon Ofnir. And on the surface, it has an interesting design, with the ornamentation of a hand clutching an orb. But have you ever taken a very close look at this orb? On the surface, it just seems like a brown sphere with a few cracks in it and a sort of reflective material underneath. And it can be very hard to get a good look at it because it reflects shadows very easily. But if we take it to somewhere well lit without a lot of cover, then we can see what's really hiding in the orb. The true nature of the orb is a galaxy, with a full view of space and all the stars around it. You really need some free cam mods to get the full view, but it's such a cool design that a player is most likely never going to notice. But the item description tips us off to that pretty well. It reads, "Scepter in the form of a hand grasping a pearl, signature weapon of Sir Gideon Ofnir the All-Knowing. The pearl stands for the world, the heavens, and an eye, representing the many forms of knowledge never fully attainable. Even knowing that, the All-Knowing's hand grasps for it." Now let's take a look at another very cool weapon design, the Sword of Saint Trina. Now this design is full of secrets and we've talked about it multiple times here on the channel, but even more have been discovered. Firstly, take a look at the sword hilt and see if you notice anything strange. It may be the Trina's lilies on the guard or the runic carvings on the base of the blade, but if you view the hilt vertically, you can actually see Saint Trina reliefed along it, holding the hands in prayer with a long robe and the hair swept backwards. It's quite a bit easier to see in the concept art, but this concept art actually has a few differences with the final product. The ornamentation at the base of the hilt has been changed. In the concept art, it appears to be two entwining wolf heads, while in the final game we have flower petals at the base. And this raises a few lore questions that we'll likely get into in a future video, but the main one is that this reminds me a lot of the mysterious statue in Farum Azula. Here we can see a young figure with long hair surrounded by 3 wolves. It's still a big mystery in the community exactly who this is. There's evidence pointing to Mikola, who is also Saint Trina, and a lot of evidence pointing to Marika, and even a little bit pointing to Ranni. Maybe we'll finally get the answer in DLC. But now that we've talked about imagery on a lot of weapons, let's talk about some imagery that Elden Ring uses in the world. When it comes to things relating to the Erdtree, the Greater Will, and the Guidance of Grace, a lot of it is told through botanical imagery, with of course the most prominent example being the Erdtree itself. But one point of imagery that's garnered a lot of attention are the runes, and how they appear as small trees when dropped by the player. And one question that was raised is that why then, if they appear this way, do consumable runes look like circles? Now we've speculated in the past that these runes might be taking the shape to resemble an eye, since enemies that drop additional runes manifest gold in their eyes. But a new theory has come out that I think holds a lot of credence, and while the idea of an eye may still be true, it's also very likely that these runes are cross-sections of trees. It would explain why the runes get bigger in size as their quantity increases, representing a tree that is growing. But I do think that if this were exactly what FromSoftware was going for, then they'd have the rings that trees have. Personally, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle, that it's meant to represent both a cross-section of a tree as well as an eye, and when we combine both of those, we get to the real idea that these are trying to communicate. But speaking of trees, let's talk about the Haligtree for a minute. It's no secret that the version of the Haligtree we find in the game is far from the ideal that Mikola envisioned. It's cracked and afflicted by rot, but because of this allows us to ask the question of what would the prime Haligtree have looked like? Take a look at this section here, with what appears to be a massive split down the middle. Now you might look at this and think that it's just one side of the Haligtree that's peeled off, but I think what's much more likely is that this is an entire second half of the Haligtree that either failed to grow or has fallen off completely. Now a few months ago I made this video talking about Minor Erdtree Church and Mikola's secret experiments that went on here. I highly recommend checking that video out. It might be one of my favorites I've ever made, but in that we talk about the significance of the double helix and how Mikola's vision was likely that of a double helix tree. Now we go much further in depth in that video, but throughout Elden Ring, the double helix is a symbol of divinity and the power to manipulate fate and the gods. But in order to connect this symbol with the Haligtree, we actually don't have to look that far. Now if we take a look at the Haligtree secret medallion, we see what appears to be a very normal looking tree. However, if we look at the Haligtree sigil, the trunk of the tree is entirely formed of the double helix. The same idea is present on the Haligtree knight armor. Once again, a double helix tree. Now let's look at Mikola's needle, and what do we see? A full double helix ending in the branches of the Haligtree. So I think it's safe to say that based on this missing half, that is the true shape of the Haligtree. So now let's talk about something pretty lighthearted. One very fascinating part of Elden Ring's lore are Goldmask's poses, and how he uses them to unravel the vast calculus of the Golden Order. But over a year ago, a post was made in the Elden Ring Reddit, appearing to show the Phantom of Goldmask in their host world, performing the gesture of frenzy. And so this got a lot of us lore buffs questioning whether this was some sort of secret interaction, or just an odd glitch. At least that mystery remained until this happened to one of our channel Discord members. So I think it's safe to say that this is just a glitch. Perhaps it's an error in the code when trying to load Goldmask poses in a Phantom's world, but I'd like to see if this is able to be recreated. You just need to be a Phantom in a host world and go pay Goldmask a visit. You might just find something crazy. But on the topic of odd interactions, one thing that might throw you for a loop are the weather and environmental effects in Elden Ring. If you've ever seen particles blowing the wrong way, or rain falling through a closed roof, it's due to the way Elden Ring generates these effects, and that's by making everything player-centric. The best place to see this in action is the Bestial Sanctum, especially during a rainstorm. Now on the inside, this is what the flames should normally look like, with the fires burning vertically, untouched by the outside wind. However, if I turn around and go back outside, you'll see how the weather becomes player-centric. And once I step beyond the threshold of the sanctum, the fires begin to get blown by the wind. You can see it happen in real time. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the advantages to having a system like this are, but it's just really interesting to see how they design things like this. And I guess in Elden Ring, the world really does revolve around you. And for the final discovery today, I want to talk about the Forbidden Outskirts, and a strange phenomena that happens there. I always found this area to be one of the weirdest in the game, mainly due to the odd atmosphere of it. It feels like an area lost to time, almost otherworldly, without a complete sense of direction. And I think to an extent that's the point, but one of the main reasons for that is the strange red aurora that wisp through the trees. There's nothing else in the game quite like it. Now design-wise, we can see a very similar happening at Raya Lucaria, but given the overflowing amount of magic here and the planetary connections, it makes sense. And the Guidance of Grace does also create that trail of light, but this one as well has an obvious explanation. But the red lights in the Forbidden Outskirts are almost hauntingly mysterious, although I may have an explanation. These red lights in the Forbidden Outskirts take us down the path to the mountaintops of the Giants, a place where life can be found in spirit form. And in Elden Ring, color coordination is very important, and in this world, red is the color of destined death. So is this red that we see in the Forbidden Outskirts a play on the idea of death and crossing over into a more spiritual realm? Or was this just FromSoftware's way of teasing Armored Core 6? Anyways though guys, that is going to pretty much do it for the video today. I hope I showed you something that you didn't already know. If I did, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're new around here. Once again, let me say a massive thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. If you want to jump in today, do not forget about my link down below to get lots of free bonuses, including vehicles, customization options, boosters, and more. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.